Hey, welcome back, everyone. There's some new updates on live organ harvesting in China, namely that Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. are actually joining together now to condemn the CCP for it. In my opinion, a very good development in terms of getting word out, especially even on this happening. But this is going to be big, especially because this is one of the one of the main no-go topics of the Chinese Communist Party. They tried to silence the world on human rights abuses. If this comes out, it's going to blow the lid on the CCP. We're going to be going into that, a few other things with national security. Also, folks, you have Republicans now trying to get details on the COVID origins, and even some Democrats are joining with them. In fact, there's some bipartisan moves with this, and the FBI looks like it's blocking it. I'll be showing you what's happening with that. Remember, the FBI we now know has assessed that COVID leaked from a laboratory. You have Dr. Fauci coming out and first of all trying to cover it up, and now saying that just because it came from a laboratory doesn't mean it was man-made, which is it could be true, but we'll go into this. It's going to be interesting, folks. Also, after the jump to Epoch TV, we're going to talk about what we cannot talk about on YouTube, namely the new January 6 videos, and also how this is basically raising some serious legal questions because it turns out the government was withholding evidence from lawyers, exculpatory evidence, meaning they were not providing people with information that could show the innocence of their clients. This is actually pretty big when it comes to the nature of even whether they're getting free trials. Whether they're getting fair trials, and whether, interestingly, this is even legal. What's happening to them? That'll be after the jump to Epoch TV because YouTube, we can't even talk about it on YouTube, despite the fact that it's true. It's going to be an interesting episode, folks. Stick around. Again, those of you on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, join us on Epoch TV. After about 25 minutes, we'll jump over exclusively. So let's jump into it. Folks, let's talk first about the Chinese Communist Party and live organ harvesting. Epoch Times had the story on this. They say bipartisan Senate bill aims to punish Beijing for forced organ harvesting. It says a bipartisan group of lawmakers in the Senate is aiming to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for forcibly harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience, many of them religious believers, most of them, as far as we know, Falun Gong practitioners. It says S761, also dubbed the Stopped Forced Organ Harvesting Act, would authorize the State Department to deny or revoke passports and visas to anyone involved in forced organ harvesting. It would also require annual government reporting on the illicit act in foreign countries and impose sanctions on facilitators. There's a quote from Senator Tom Cotton, Republican. He's saying there is growing evidence that the Chinese Communist Party has and continues to harvest organs from persecuted religious groups, prisoners of conscience, and inmates. And he led the legislation with Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat. Now, they said this in a March 9th press release. Now, he added that it's, quote, it's past time to hold Beijing accountable for these heinous acts. Coons, co-chair of the Senate Human Rights Caucus, described forced organ harvesting as cruel and immoral, noting that it often targets ethnic and religious minorities and some of the most vulnerable groups in the world. He said, I am proud to reintroduce the bipartisan Stop Forced Organ Harvesting Act that will empower the Biden administration to take action against those who practice this despicable crime. So Epoch Times, we actually broke this story years ago. I believe it was 2006 or 2007. We had sources coming out from China saying that the Chinese Communist Party was using religious believers as living sources for organ transplants, pulling them down like products on a shelf, killing them while extracting their organs, usually while they're still alive. Because, of course, some of you may know, when you do an organ transplant, the freshness of the organ, so to speak, can play a huge factor in determining whether or not you can successfully have an organ transplant, especially when it comes to vital, hearts and so on. The Chinese Communist Party gets around that by taking healthy, living people, tying them down, sometimes even without painkillers, as we've been told, and extracting their organs while they're still alive and while they're still living, breathing, and fully conscious. using their organs, transplanting them, and killing them in the process. They even take the skin, notably. They skin people even. There's horrifying stories of this. The way this is normally portrayed is that the CCP basically, because in Chinese culture, this is important to note, in Chinese culture, the preservation of the body is very important in burial rites and so on. In fact, in traditional Chinese culture, if you read back, the desecration of a body is regarded as like a major sin. It's regarded as like a major, heavenly crime, basically. And you'll see in a lot of older Chinese novels and books that if a person's going to be killed, they'll often request that their body not be desecrated. They're more afraid of their body being desecrated than of being killed. It's because of this that, because of traditional Chinese culture and beliefs that still, exist today, people usually do not agree to become organ donors upon death. Most other countries have voluntary organ donation programs. If you sign up for your driver's license, you can choose or not choose to become an organ donor. In China, they don't really have that. And so they get their organs from prisoners, people they say they execute, for example. The problem is in China, what defines a prisoner and what defines someone on death row? That could be someone who believes in democracy. That can be a Muslim Uyghur. That can be a house Christian. Your only crime is following the original tenets of your religion rather than the CCP-run version. Most of them, as we now know, are Falun Gong practitioners, also known as Falun Dafa, Chinese meditation practice based on the ideas of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Basically, people trying to be good people and being persecuted for it because the CCP regards it as a threat to their atheistic rule, as they state. The other problem you have is that it's not only hospitals in China. A lot of it's actually being done through the military hospitals. But there's actually a lot of foreign involvement as well, including organ tourism, including doctors who engage in these practices going to international organ transplant symposiums and so on. The Chinese Communist Party risks becoming basically the global leader on organ transplant technology because they have so much experience, because they do it so often. Now, some countries have restricted the ability of citizens to travel to China for organ transplants, but some don't. In fact, some doctors even promote it. Some countries, basically, China works as the place to go get organ transplants, and they will kill people in order to give you an organ. Innocent people. Now, that being said, to hold them accountable would be a big deal. We might remember we talked about this huge study they did. They put it on trial in the UK, an independent organization, and they found that not only is organ harvesting of prisoners of conscience happening in China, it is happening on a very large scale. And they determined that not only will the doctors be held accountable, but anybody who is involved will be held accountable. I will remind everybody that when the Nazis were put on trial during the Nuremberg trials, even journalists were prosecuted, some of them hanged. This actually could happen once the truth comes out on what's happening in China. And in fact, I think the world needs it. The world needs this kind of justice, in my opinion. That said, folks, while this is happening in China, if you criticize communism in, like, the Chinese Communist Party, there are teachers' unions in the United States that say that criticizing communism is equal to Asian hate. Let me show you. The Federalist had this story. They say Virginia Teachers Union pushes Senate Democrats to end anti-Asian victims of Communism Day. It says the Virginia Education Association whipped the Commonwealth Senate Democrats into opposing a Victims of Communism commemoration bill due to its anti-Asian sentiments. So if we criticize communism in China under the Chinese Communist Party, if we criticize the fact that they're using their own citizens as living sources for organ transplants, does that mean that you're anti-Asian? Because you're standing up for the human rights of Asian people persecuted by communist governments? Well, apparently the Virginia Teachers Association, the Virginia Education Association, seems to believe this. And it says it's demonstrating the union's historical ignorance, woke ideology, and educational incompetence. It says in recent weeks, Democrats in the Virginia Senate and the Commonwealth's Teachers Union have shown they see history as a tool to promote racial ideology, not as a means to understand the past. A few days after defeating an Indian American nominee based on the ludicrous claim that she associated with white supremacists, remember how broadly that's defined now, Democrats in a Senate committee managed to offend Asian Americans and victims of communism. Further, it states the Virginia Education Association, which represents public school teachers, said it opposed the measure because it was, quote, concerned that the bill would subject Asian American students to anti-Asian sentiments, citing the fact that Eastern Asia contains 4 out of 5 remaining communist regimes, all except Cuba. Let's discuss these communist regimes. The Chinese Communist Party, which is carrying out live organ harvesting of Chinese people, Asian people, which has killed between 50 million and 70 million Chinese people. Some put the number even up to 100 million, and they're still counting. You have, for example, Vietnam. You ask your average Vietnamese refugee, like the boat people, what they think of the Vietnamese Communist Party. I doubt they would say that it is anti-Asian to criticize the regime there. You can talk about Cambodia, where my father-in-law is from. In fact, my father-in-law did a video with the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation because he was a doctor in Cambodia. He was put in a death camp and he escaped. In fact, you can watch his video on the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation website. They did a short documentary on him. His name is Naloum, Naloum, if you want to watch it. And actually, I believe American Thought Leaders also did a video with him. You know, people who've suffered under communist regimes. Oh, and then, of course, North Korea, right? Let's not forget North Korea. We can look at how human rights are in North Korea. Is it okay now? Is it anti-Asian to criticize the abuses of the North Korean people under the North Korean Communist Party? That's what they're suggesting here. This is the way that race politics are being used to crush discussions on human rights. This is like saying that criticizing Nazism is offensive to Germans. That's the equivalent of what this teachers association is doing, this union is doing. Absolutely appalling, in my opinion. Folks, before we go on, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, as we've been talking about with the bank crashes happening, inflation is going to continue, especially they do the bailouts and so on. And it's likely going to get a lot worse. It's already getting worse. Fed Chair Powell is warning us to brace ourselves. While there's one way to hedge against inflation, American Hartford Gold makes it simple and easy to diversify your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. With one short phone call, they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or into your IRA or 401k. American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A-plus rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. If you call them right now, they'll give you up to $2,500 of free silver and a free safe on qualifying orders. So don't wait, call them now. That's 877-260-2764, 877-260-2764, or text Joshua to 65532. Again, that's 877-260-2764, or text Joshua to 65532. And big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring today's episode. Frankly, those of you who bought gold are probably pretty dang happy right now because I've been watching the numbers on it. Because actually, even after this crash, there was a rush on Bitcoin and gold. Actually, folks, going a bit further, what's happening right now? It's interesting. Something else is taking place. Democrats and Republicans are joining together also on calling for an investigation into the origins of COVID-19. And there is some division on this. Dr. Fauci first was trying to block it. Now he's trying to reframe it. You have, of course, the Biden administration. They had a bill go forward. Biden is still not sure whether he's going to sign it or not. He's made it clear that he's undecided. But you also have House investigations now looking into the origin. They have requested the documents on the origins of COVID-19 Because as we now know, both the FBI and the Department of Energy have assessed that a lab leak is the most likely origin of COVID-19. Lab leak in China. Which, if you watch my documentary almost 3 years ago now, you might have known this entire time, but it's nice to see it's coming out. Let's go over this, folks. Fox News has a story, and they say this. House Democrats and GOP Republicans vote unanimously, all of them, to declassify COVID origins intel, and they've sent the bill to Biden. It says House lawmakers made it clear Friday that it's time for the Biden administration to come clean on what it knows about COVID-19's origin. Republican and Democrats voted unanimously. You almost never see this. 419-0. All of them voted on it, at least everyone who voted, to require the Biden administration's Director of National Intelligence to declassify all intelligence related to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the one I talked about several years ago, and possible links to the origins of the COVID-19 virus. That release will be required 90 days after the bill is signed. The vote followed new assessments of the Department of Energy and the FBI that a lab leak in China was the most likely source of the pandemic that killed millions of people around the world. After those assessments were revealed, the Senate unanimously passed the GOP bill last week, and the House followed with its own unanimous vote a little more than a week later. You get that, folks? House and the Senate, all Republicans and all Democrats who voted, all want to have this information released. Because as we've been discussing, we now know the FBI and the DOE have assessed that a lab leak is the most likely origin of COVID-19. Interestingly, because, well, folks like myself have been censored and attacked for stating that for over 3 years. In fact, one of the first times I was demonetized on YouTube was because I was saying this. They said I was spreading anti-Asian hate, I believe was what they said. Now, it's not just this bill requesting this. And again, Biden has signaled he's not sure if he's going to sign that yet. I think it would look bad on him given the fact that all the Democrats seem to want it released. But maybe he has reasons for not wanting it to be released. It's not going to look good on him, I should note, because House investigations looking into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden have now found documents showing that Hunter Biden had business deals with China, some of which very likely did benefit Joe Biden. I will give updates on that as information comes out. The details are a little thin right now, but I will give updates on that. So Biden's ties to the CCP are beginning to be revealed, and if he does not demonstrate really a stronger stance against them with things like this, it could actually look very bad on him, especially when his own party is going unanimously with the Republicans on this. That said, there's actually other channels to get this information. One of them is the House investigation taking place right now. And it looks like the FBI and the State Department are basically ignoring them. Now, to make it clear why this is a big deal, folks, you had Democrats looking to put people in prison for, for refusing to work with House investigations. Steve Bannon, for example, may go to prison very soon because he refused to participate in the January 6 committee's investigations into January 6. The FBI and State Department are doing the same thing now, and we'll see if people go to prison for this in the same way that the Democrats are trying to put other people in prison for the refusing to participate in the January 6 investigations, but we'll see. It says here, Epoch Times has it, FBI State Department missed deadline to produce COVID origin information to House panel. It says the FBI and State Department did not provide documents by the deadline in response to a congressional request for information on the origins of the COVID-19 virus, but the agencies are expected to comply, so we will see, according to the House panel seeking the information. The information was requested on February 27th, and I'll go further into this. They said this. The deadline, by the way, was March 13th. So we've passed it only by a couple days. But they said, we have not received documents at this time, but we are in communication with the agencies about the chairman's request, and we expect compliance, a spokesperson of the committee told the Epoch Times on March 13th. And a spokesperson for the State Department told the Epoch Times this when we asked them why they're not giving the data. They said, quote, President Biden has directed every element of our intelligence community to put the effort and resources behind getting to the bottom of the origins of COVID-19. We will continue to use every tool to figure out what happened here. And if we gain further insight, the president has directed the administration to share that with Congress and the American people. Well, in my opinion, that's a very roundabout way of not explaining why they're not providing the information they already have to a House investigation when they're required by law to comply, and frankly could be held in contempt, just like Bannon is of the Senate, or sorry, of the House, contempt of Congress technically, for not complying. You find this very often with political statements. You'll ask them, why are you not doing this? And they'll be like, we believe this is very important, and we're, of course, doing our work to make sure we get to the bottom of it. Well, why are you not doing it? Why are you not telling me what you're doing? This is what they're basically saying. They're not complying with a House request for this information. They could be held in contempt of Congress if they do not provide it, because people are being put in prison for that, which was previously kind of not really normally done. House investigations did not normally do that. Democrats changed the game with the January 6th committee by beginning to hold people in contempt. And rather than state why they're not providing it, what they're stating is, we're currently researching it, and Biden directed us to research it. Well, great. Show us your research, right? Show us your research. Regardless, it says the FBI just entirely declined to comment. We actually tried contacting the FBI. They had nothing to say. They didn't respond at all. Well, they declined to comment. Now, basically, right now, it says the Select Committee is investigating the origins of COVID-19 and the CCP's efforts to cover it up. And also, folks, we'll see what comes out with this. They pledged to leave no stone unturned. So it's going to be interesting as this comes out. Dr. Fauci's, of course, in the hot seat with a lot of this, because it's coming out now that his organization was, financing this research to some extent. Research that is, I think, widely believed to have led to the creation of a virus either very similar to or COVID-19, including, for example, what would constitute gain-of-function research, although in their legal documents they don't use the phrase gain-of-function. The story coming out now is basically that, in fact, Joe Rogan had, I believe, an individual on just talking about this. Robert Kennedy Jr., I believe. You've had other folks doing rounds talking about the history of Fauci's involvement with this type of research. And Fauci's in a very difficult position as he needs to make this clear. He's even having online spats with individuals who are calling for his prosecution, in fact. The story coming out right now, and again, we'll see where the coins fall, let's say, is that Fauci was doing basically gain-of-function research in the United States. Gain-of-function, even though it may not be defined as biological weapons research, it's basically the same thing. If you are creating viruses using gain-of-function, you're taking existing viruses and you're adding functions to them. For example, we know that with what looks like COVID-19, they were manipulating SARS. Remember, COVID-19 is SARS-CoV-2, SARS Part 2, basically. They were taking SARS and they were messing with the spike proteins to make it so it's more easily able to infect humans. They were even using humanized mice for this type of research. Now, given that this type of research was banned, actually, I believe under the Obama administration, it was after it was banned that Fauci began working with other companies as intermediaries to continue this type of research in China. And the legalities of that are very questionable. Again, they got around the technicality of whether it's gain of function by just not using the phrase gain of function in the legal documents. But that we'll see how that holds up. That's basically where things are at right now, and he's facing a lot of criticism for this. That being said, some folks are now calling for social networks to restore people who are censored or maybe even apologize for banning people for talking about the lab leak theory and other things. You might remember that Facebook was the first organization to go after me personally when I did my documentary on the COVID origins, which you can still find on the Epoch Times website and on YouTube, actually. But Bakari is saying this: Facebook should reinstate users banned for lab leak coronavirus theory. And it says Facebook got it wrong. They got it wrong on many other occasions and will get it wrong on many future occasions, of course, but this time it is different. They've admitted they got it wrong. The company recently backtracked on a long-standing policy of coronavirus-related censorship, saying it would no longer remove claims that the virus is man-made or lab-manufactured. As Breitbart News' Simon Kent reported, this occurred on the same day that President Biden ordered the intelligence agencies to increase efforts to discover the cause of the virus. And they said, the policy change came on the same day President Biden ordered. I will restate this. Basically, folks, if you remember back when I did my documentary investigating the origins of COVID-19, I believe we got around 150. We had about 100 million views within just a couple of weeks, actually, or maybe 3 weeks or so. I think we topped off at about 150 million. But a lot of those views were on Facebook. We had celebrities sharing it, and it was getting a lot of traction. Facebook then shut it down. They did bizarre things that, frankly, I wonder if I could hold them legally liable for, to be honest. First, they had a fact checker First, they put a fact check on it, and they used a fact checker who had tried to debunk, I believe, a New York Post article or another media's article. It turned out that fact checker had previously worked at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the basis of her claim saying it was disinformation was because she claimed that, as someone who worked at that laboratory, that the security protocols were very good, and because the security protocols were very good, a lab leak possibility was not there. Basically, she said it's impossible because China has such great security. It's a ridiculous claim because lab leaks happen all the time, actually. That they, of course, did a second review after that. Well, they did other things too. They also said that the image of my face on the advertisement of not the advertisement, but of the video, they said my face was sexually suggestive. I'm not even joking. And they put an age restriction on it. And then every single person who shared the video was sent an alert by Facebook telling them that they shared disinformation or false content or whatever. And then they did a second fact check, I believe it was like a Brazilian fact checker or something like that, claiming that my theory was fake or that my findings were fake, because I discussed actually in there scientific documents, which included, for example, analysis that looked like there was experiments happening with HIV, which, if we understand the nature of the the fact that people become immunocompromised to some extent with COVID-19, it's actually plausible. And in fact, research has been coming out more recently showing that actually it looks like they were doing experiments even with HIV, and the ability of this to compromise a person's immune system. There's surprising stuff like this. Of course, the documentary was all based on it was based on publicly available research. We didn't really go off on a limb on anything. It was all very solid, and everything has since held up, lo and behold. Yeah, Linda 2010, you said you can find it on YouTube, but they slap a big warning on it when you go to share it. Oh, there you go. Anyways, I'm wondering if I don't like engaging with court stuff. I could probably sue them for a lot if I really wanted to, but it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and I'm glad the truth is coming out. I'm glad that they're backtracking some of this. I would personally like a very serious apology from Facebook, but again, we'll see if that ever happens. Regardless, folks, it's nice to be vindicated. And I think the research has withstood the test of time. All right, folks, for the rest of the episode, we're going to have to jump over to Epoch TV because, well, while we're being proven right on one thing, another thing is still deeply censored, and that is January 6th. Even though I will say our research on that is also beginning now to come out as being true. But YouTube will actually give us a strike if we talk about some of this content, and so we cannot talk about this on YouTube. They've given me retroactive strikes on this, in fact. Folks, that said, let's jump over to Epoch TV and we'll talk about January 6th and legal questions that are now being raised for the Department of Justice from the videos that Tucker Carlson released, videos which corroborate those findings we had in our documentary, the documentary, The Real Story of January 6th, which you can buy on DVD, by the way, on the Epoch TV store. Folks, let me show you a quick trailer, though, before we jump over. Yeah, there you go. Robert F. Kennedy, speaking of him, the individual really calling out Fauci right now, spoke with our host, Yanya Kellick, on American Thought Leaders, and he did a really interesting two-part series. This is part one. He says, the dark secrets of the childhood immunization schedule and the vaccine approval process. If you have kids or grandkids who are going to be vaccinated, this is important to watch. You can watch this interview on Epoch TV. Let me show you the trailer of that, and then we'll jump over exclusively to Epoch TV for the rest of the episode.
If you want to flourish at NIH or any of these regulatory agencies, the way to do that is by carrying water for the pharmaceutical industry.
Today I sit down with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the founder and chief legal counsel of Children's Health Defense and author of The Real Anthony Fauci. In this comprehensive two-part interview, he shares his journey from environmental activist to a fierce critic of the vaccine approval process in America. Not a single vaccine on the childhood immunization schedule has been tested against a true placebo, he argues. How did we get to where we are today? How is it that the Bill of Rights was essentially suspended during the pandemic? And what role did government agencies play in all of this?
What is the CIA doing in a pandemic simulation? They're not a public health agency.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick.
Again, folks, that is on Epoch TV. It's an interesting episode to watch, and if you have kids or grandkids, I recommend it. That said, folks, let's jump over exclusively to Epoch TV to talk about things YouTube will currently not let us talk about. The next frontline topic, which is the truth of January 6th, now being released and now vindicating what we've all been talking about for almost 2 years now. So let's jump over now to Epoch, almost 3 now going on, but 2 plus. Let's jump over to Epoch TV exclusively, folks, and I'll see you there. And thank you for being here, folks. Thank you for your ongoing support as well.